He walked slowly, feeling the ground with the tip of his shoe as if searching for something he could no longer touch. Reverend Marcus Lee never saw the execution room clearly, but even without sight, he felt the weight of its cold walls, the metallic smell of the wires, and the silence that comes before a final breath. In 1958, inside the darkness of a Tennessee prison, an innocent blind preacher was strapped to the electric chair as if he were the worst kind of monster, all because the truth was easier to bury than to face. For decades, his name drifted through whispers, a shameful memory in the town that once condemned him. Some remembered him as the old preacher who spoke about faith in small public squares, others as the strange, quiet man who walked alone along rural roads. But no one, absolutely no one, knew what he truly said in the final hours of his life, until the lost tape resurfaced. A forgotten recording tucked away in a dusty box, kept by a man who carried guilt for far too long. Today you will hear every word, every breath, every truth they tried to silence. And before this story begins, before Marcus's voice echoes again after so many years of darkness, I want to ask you something he always asked people before starting his sermons. Where are you watching from? Write your city and state in the comments. Let his truth travel farther than anyone ever imagined. Now take a deep breath. The light is turning on, the tape is rolling, and the last words of an innocent man are finally about to be heard.
My name is Marcus Lee, and if you can hear my voice, it means the world finally allowed me to speak for myself. I don't know if this camera is pointed exactly at my face. My eyes don't work the way they used to. But I'll trust that whoever will watch this someday will see me as I truly am. Not as the monster they painted. Not as the killer they claimed I was. Just as a blind old man who still believes in truth. I was born in a small town outside Memphis back in 1886. Life was different then. Slower. Simpler. My mother used to say that when a man carried faith in his chest, he could cross any river, climb any hill, and find his way home even in the dark. Funny, isn't it? I've spent the last years literally living in the dark, and yet I've never felt so far from home. I wasn't a famous preacher. I wasn't the kind with big churches or crowds. I walked from town to town, carrying nothing but an old Bible, a cracked pair of glasses, and the belief that people still had goodness inside them. That belief kept me warm in the cold nights, fed me when I went hungry, and helped me guide folks who were lost long before I ever lost my sight. I wasn't perfect. Lord knows I wasn't, but I tried to leave kindness wherever my feet touched the ground. My eyes started failing in my 50s. First it was blurry lights, then faces turned into shadows, then shadows into nothing. By the time they accused me, I could barely make out the shape of my own hands. But blindness never stopped me from hearing things. The tone of a voice, the fear hidden behind a word, the lie slipping between someone's teeth. People forget that when one sense disappears, the others sharpen like a blade, and on the night everything happened. I heard enough to know the truth nobody wanted to listen to. They said I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. The truth is, I was exactly where God placed me. I didn't go there to harm anyone. I went because I heard a cry, a girl's voice, scared, hurt. I followed the sound, stumbling through branches and rocks I couldn't see. And when I reached her, her hands were shaking, her breath was broken. But she was alive. Alive. I need you to remember that. They never wanted to hear that part. They shut their ears the moment they saw me holding her. A blind old preacher in the dark woods with a terrified girl. It was easier for them to jump to a verdict than to admit they'd failed their own children long before I ever walked into that forest. I'm not angry, not anymore. Anger makes a man heavy, and I don't have much strength left to carry anything else. I just want to leave the truth recorded somewhere, something my son might hear someday. I haven't seen him in years, not since before my eyes went black. I don't even know if he still remembers the sound of my voice. But if he ever watches this, James, I'm still your father, and I never hurt anyone. Not that girl. Not a soul. This is my last chance to speak before the world turns me off like a lamp no one needs anymore. I don't beg for mercy. I don't beg for life. I just beg for ears willing to listen. Because what happened that night, what truly happened, is nothing like the story they built. And when I tell you the rest, I hope you'll understand why a blind man could see the truth more clearly than all of them combined. I remember the moment the sheriff's hand touched my shoulder. Not because I saw him, I couldn't see much more than a gray blur even in daylight, but because his grip was cold, trembling. Like a man who wanted to believe he had found a monster, even though he knew deep down he hadn't. People talk about justice as if it were a straight line, clear and easy to follow. But that night, justice twisted itself into something unrecognizable. I kept telling them the girl was alive when I found her. I told them she'd tried to speak, tried to form words through her tears. I felt her small hand gripping my sleeve. I knew fear when I heard it, but I also knew innocence. Hers and mine. But none of that mattered when the crowd gathered. I could hear their boots pounding the dirt, hear their whispers turning into accusations, hear their breath tightening as anger replaced reason. I asked for help, not for me, but for the girl. They took her from my arms like I was poison. The sheriff didn't ask me a single question, not one. He just put ropes around my wrists and pushed my cane aside. My only way of seeing the world lay somewhere in the mud, abandoned like the truth they refused to touch. They dragged me through the woods, branches cutting my face, stones bruising my knees. I told them I couldn't see. They told me that blindness wasn't an excuse for evil. Evil. They said the word like they were talking about the devil himself. In the station, the questions weren't really questions. They were traps. Why were you there? What did you do to her? Why did she scream when they found you? They twisted everything I said, pulling pieces of my story out of place until it sounded like a confession. I tried to tell them she wasn't screaming at me. She was screaming for help. But they had already decided who I was. A blind old preacher in the wrong spot was more convenient than the uncomfortable truth they'd been ignoring about their own community. My trial lasted 4 days. 4. A lifetime stolen in less time than it takes to bury a man. I couldn't see the jury, but I could hear the way they shifted in their seats when the prosecutor spoke. The same way people shift when a snake slides under a door. I felt the room leaning against me before the first witness ever opened his mouth. Half the town testified without ever having spoken to me in their lives. They said I was strange. They said I walked alone at night. They said I preached to people who weren't sitting in church. They painted me as unpredictable, untrustworthy, dangerous. Because blindness in their eyes was close enough to madness. And the girl, they spoke of her like an angel. But no one mentioned the man whose name she whispered before she stopped breathing. No one except me. And that was why they silenced me. They refused to let me call James, my son, as a witness. They said it would confuse the narrative. I guess they didn't want a blind man's child standing up in court saying his father spent his life helping strangers, not hurting them. The verdict came as quickly as the accusation. Guilty. The word hit me harder than the hands that dragged me out of the courtroom. They never allowed me to see or touch the girl's belongings found at the scene. But I heard whispers. A ribbon that didn't belong to her. Footsteps that were too heavy to be mine. A witness who changed his story 3 times. And a sheriff who refused to sign the final report until the room was empty. And still, they chose me. They chose the easiest man to condemn, the one who couldn't point a finger at anyone else. I wish I could tell you that I accepted it with grace. I didn't. I was angry, terrified, lost, blind in more ways than one. But the truth has a way of crawling back into the light, even when people try to bury it deep. And the deepest part of it, the part no one dared to touch, is what happened after the trial ended. What someone told me in a whisper that still haunts me even now. Because that whisper is where the real story begins. I didn't feel the weight of the verdict until they placed me back in that cold cell and closed the door. It wasn't the chains around my wrists, nor the darkness that was already familiar to me. It was the silence. A silence so deep it felt like the world had stepped away from me, leaving nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat. Slow, tired, unsure. But what broke me wasn't the cell. It was the thought of my son. James was only a boy when my eyesight began to fail. He used to guide me with his small hands, telling me to lift my feet over the steps, or warning me when a branch hung too low. He'd laugh when I stumbled on purpose just to hear him giggle. When his mother died, it was just the two of us. I tried to raise him with the little I had, faith, kindness, and honesty. But life has a way of pulling fathers and sons apart, especially when hunger and work chase both in opposite directions. I hadn't seen him in years. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want him to see what I'd become. When word reached him about my arrest, I imagined he'd come running, insisting I wasn't capable of hurting anyone. I imagined his voice, older now, stronger, grounding me the way he used to when he held my arm to keep me from falling. I prayed, truly prayed, that he'd stand in that courtroom and say, "My father is blind, but he sees more than all of you." But James never walked through that door. At first I thought he didn't know. Then I thought he didn't care. Then I feared he believed what they said about me. The guards delivered a letter one morning. I held the envelope like it was made of glass. His handwriting, I'd know it anywhere, even without seeing it. My fingers traced the familiar pressure of his strokes. I asked the guard to read it aloud. He refused, said it wasn't his job, said I could save it for the priest. So I sat there for hours clutching a letter I couldn't see, wishing more than anything that I could read my son's words one last time. I imagined what they might say. Maybe anger, maybe disappointment, maybe forgiveness. I would have taken any of it. When the chaplain finally came, he read the letter in a voice that trembled more than mine. "Father, I don't know what to believe. I want to trust you, but everyone says I don't know what to do." There was more, a hesitation, a pain between the lines, but that sentence alone cut deeper than the verdict. My son was lost in the same darkness that swallowed me, not the blindness in my eyes, but the blindness of the world around us. I wrote him back. I told him I loved him. I told him the truth. I told him I needed him to believe in the man who raised him, not in the story strangers crafted out of fear and convenience. But he never wrote again. The weeks passed. The prison grew colder. The guards stopped calling me Reverend and started calling me Dead Man. And every night I'd imagine James growing older, maybe with children of his own, trying to live a life without the weight of a father condemned as a murderer. But the weight was mine to carry, not his. The last time I asked the warden if my son had tried to visit, he sighed like a man who had seen too much death and not enough truth. "He came once," he said. "Months ago. We turned him away. Wrong paperwork. Wrong paperwork." Just like that, they denied a son the chance to look his father in the eyes, even blind eyes, and understand that love and truth still lived there. I never saw him. Not even a shadow, not even a silhouette. But I still felt him. In the quiet moments, in the trembling breath before sleep, in the memory of his small hands guiding me when I could still pretend I wasn't broken. And it was that memory, that fragile, fading echo of my boy, that kept me from giving up completely. Because only one thing hurt more than being sentenced to die for something I didn't do. Knowing that the person I loved most in this world might die believing I was guilty, and that fear, that unbearable fear, only grew stronger the day something unexpected happened in that prison. Something that made me realize the truth was closer than I ever imagined. Something that changed everything. Time doesn't move the same way in here. Out there, years pass with seasons, with birthdays, with Sundays at church and children running down dusty roads. But in the corridor where they keep men waiting to die, time dissolves. It becomes a slow drip, like water leaking from a pipe you can't fix. A man can drown in those drops long before the chair ever touches his skin. When they sentenced me, I thought I had months left, maybe a year. But appeals dragged on, lawyers came and went, witnesses changed their stories, and yet nothing changed for me. I stayed in the same cell, listening to the footsteps of guards who whispered as if death itself were walking beside them. Some men screamed at night, others prayed so loudly the walls shook. A few stayed quiet until the end, breaking only when they heard the generator humming for the first time, the sound that meant someone's turn had come. I learned the rhythm of those sounds, the metallic clinks, the shuffle of feet, the last breath a man takes before the world forgets he existed. But the hardest part wasn't hearing others die. It was hearing them go innocent. Many men lie. I know that, but not all of them. Not the ones whose voices cracked, who told their stories with the same trembling truth I felt inside my own chest. Men forgotten by their families, men betrayed by the system, men who never got the chance to prove anything. I listened. I remembered their names, because someone had to. Years turned into decades. I felt my bones weaken, my hands tremble more, my breath shorten. Some guards treated me kindly, maybe because they saw an old blind preacher where others saw a criminal. Others treated me like nothing more than a body taking up space. I forgave them all. Forgiveness was the only thing I had left to give. I used to run my fingers along the rough walls of my cell just to remind myself I was still here, still alive, still something more than a man waiting for a date he didn't choose. I preached to myself sometimes, not sermons, just thoughts I needed to hear out loud before they slipped away. Memories of my mother humming hymns, my son laughing, the warmth of sunlight on my face before the world turned dark. But even in this place, the truth has a strange way of finding its way in. One night, I don't know what year it was anymore, a new guard came to my door. His voice was young, nervous, uncertain. He said he'd read my file, said something felt wrong, said the sheriff back then had a reputation, said the girl's case had details that didn't fit. He whispered all this like the walls could swallow his words. I asked him what he meant. He hesitated. Then he said something that froze the blood in my veins. Reverend, someone else was seen near that girl. Someone important. Someone the sheriff protected. Before I could ask who, footsteps echoed down the hall and he rushed away. For weeks he avoided me. But I knew he'd uncovered a piece of the truth. A piece that threatened the story the town had clung to for years. Then, when I least expected it, he returned. His voice was shaking. He said, "There's a tape, a recording. I'm trying to find it." A tape? Of what? Of whom? But before he could say more, he was transferred. Gone overnight. And I was left alone again, clutching hope like it was a flame cupped inside trembling hands. A flame so small it could die at any moment. Yet somehow it kept burning. Because for the first time in decades, someone on the outside believed me. And that belief became a seed of truth. A seed that would grow into something far bigger than I ever imagined. Something that wouldn't surface until after I was gone. Because what that guard discovered, the identity of the real person who was with that girl, would shake the entire story apart. And the tape he mentioned? That tape was the key. There's a moment, every man on death row knows it, when the weight of injustice becomes heavier than the chains on your wrists. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds slowly, like rust eating iron, like mold creeping through wood. You don't notice it until one morning you inhale, and the air tastes different, bitter, old. Like the world has decided you've lived long enough. For me, that moment came the day the warden told me the board had denied my final appeal. He said it like he was reading the weather. No pause, no sorrow, no hesitation. Your execution date is confirmed. That was it. After decades of waiting, of hoping someone would care enough to look deeper, it all ended with a single sentence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow. Like my soul had slipped through these old bones and left the shell behind. Blindness teaches you to rely on sound. And that afternoon, the world was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat echoing inside my ears. A slow, uneven rhythm, like a man walking home in the rain. I had imagined dying many times. I'd imagined the chair, the straps, the smell of the wires warming up. But what I never imagined was the feeling of being forgotten. The guards who'd known me for years avoided my cell now. Men I'd prayed with, men I'd comforted after long nights on duty, suddenly acted like I was already dead, as if acknowledging me would tie them to my fate. I forgave them. That's what faith does to a man. It teaches him to let go of the stones others throw. Still, the injustice stung deeper than anything I'd felt before, because I wasn't just dying. I was dying labeled as a killer, a threat, a danger to the innocent. And yet, I'd never killed anyone. In the quietest hours of the night, when even the rats stopped moving, the memories came back sharper than any knife. The girl's voice trembling in the dark, her fingers clinging to my sleeve. Her last breath, soft, barely there, fading before help arrived. I remembered her trying to speak, trying to tell me something, a name, a place, a warning. If only they'd listened. If only they'd let her speak. But the sheriff wanted a villain, and the town wanted closure. A blind preacher stumbling into the wrong place at the wrong time was the perfect sacrifice. And so they tied the noose of guilt around my neck and never looked back. What hurt the most wasn't the injustice itself, but how quickly the world accepted it. How neighbors who once shared food with me, who nodded when I preached in dusty squares, suddenly whispered that blindness was a curse, that I must have hidden evil behind my sermons. Evil. They loved that word. They used it like a key, locking me inside a story I didn't belong to. There were nights when anger consumed me, others when sadness weighed heavier. But the worst nights were the ones when doubt crawled into my heart. Not doubt that I was innocent, but doubt that the truth would ever be heard. I used to wonder if God had turned his face from me, if my blindness was punishment for some sin I didn't know I'd committed, if my son's distance was a sign that my family line should end with me. These thoughts haunted me more cruelly than the sound of the generator outside the execution room. But somewhere within all that darkness, something stubborn stayed alive. A spark, a voice, a whisper. Hold on. And that whisper grew louder the day someone slipped a piece of paper under my door. Not a guard, not a chaplain, not a lawyer. Someone else. The paper had only 3 words, written in shaky strokes, rushed, almost fearful. I know more. No signature, no explanation, no name. But those 3 words ignited something inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. A fragile, trembling hope, but hope nonetheless. And little did I know, that slip of paper, small enough to fit under a door, would open a truth big enough to destroy the lie they built around me. Because the person who wrote it was someone I never expected. I kept that piece of paper hidden under my mattress for days. I ran my fingers over the 3 words again and again, tracing each letter like a man reading scripture in Braille. I know more. More of what? More than the sheriff said. More than the prosecutor invented. More than the town whispered in the dark. Whoever wrote it knew something. Something real. Something dangerous. And I felt it in my bones. That message wasn't a mistake. It wasn't meant for another cell. It was meant for me. The next night I heard footsteps stop in front of my door. Not the heavy steps of a guard. These were softer, unsure. Someone breathing through their mouth, trying not to be heard. I sat on the edge of my cot and said quietly, "Who's there?" Silence. Then a whisper, thin, trembling. "Reverend, I need to tell you something." The voice didn't belong to a man. It was a woman. I stood slowly, holding the wall to steady myself. "What do you know?" I asked. "What did you see?" She swallowed hard. I heard the sound, a nervous, painful gulp. She wasn't supposed to be there. No woman was allowed in that hallway at night. Which meant she worked somewhere in the prison, or slipped where she shouldn't have. I can't stay long," she said. "But the girl, the one they said you killed?" My heart stopped. Every muscle in my body tightened. "What about her?" I whispered. "She wasn't supposed to be in those woods," the woman murmured. "Someone took her there, someone she trusted, and someone the sheriff didn't want to accuse." A surge of heat rushed through my chest. Anger, fear, hope, all tangled together. "Who?" I asked. "Tell me who?" But she didn't answer the question. Instead, she said, "The sheriff closed the case too fast, too clean. They hid things that didn't match the story they gave in court." I felt the air leaving my lungs. I had always suspected it, but hearing it from another person, a stranger risking her job just to speak to me, that meant something had broken in the wall of lies around me. "Why come to me now?" I asked. She hesitated, her voice trembling. "Because someone else was there that night. Someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near that girl." "Who?" I repeated. "Please, say the name." But she backed away. I heard her steps retreating, fast, panicked. Before she left, she whispered one last thing. She said a name before she died, a name you tried to repeat in court. They erased it from your testimony. They said a blind man's memory couldn't be trusted. My legs felt weak. I grabbed the bars to keep from falling. "What name?" I begged. "Tell me the name," she said. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, a guard approaching from the far end. She vanished into the shadows before I could hear her answer. Only the faint smell of lavender lingered, the scent of a woman who lived with guilt. For days afterward, I replayed her words in my mind. Someone she trusted. Someone the sheriff protected. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The truth wasn't lost. It had been buried. And someone inside that prison, someone who lived among the secrets, was finally cracking under the weight of their conscience. A week later, another clue arrived. This time, slipped under my bowl during dinner. A torn piece of newspaper, old, yellowed. A wedding announcement. My fingers traced the embossed lettering. A man's name, a woman's name, and a date. The girl who died had been the flower girl at that wedding. And the man whose name appeared on that announcement was the same man whose footsteps I heard in the woods that night, a man whose voice the sheriff recognized, a man whose family owned half the land in that county, a man with enough money and power to erase his sins. And the girl, with her final breath, had tried to say his name. I never saw him, but I heard him. And now, someone else knew it too. But what terrified me most wasn't the truth itself. It was who inside that prison was trying to reveal it. Because there was only one person with access to old police files, wedding announcements, and restricted evidence. One person whose silence had protected the lie for all these years. And when I realized who it was, my blood ran cold. Because the person trying to help me was the same person who helped put me here. I spent nights turning that realization over in my mind like a stone in my hands. The person trying to help me was the same person who helped put me here. You might think that made me angry. Maybe it should have. But what I felt first wasn't anger. It was something colder, something heavier. It was the feeling that the truth had always been closer than I believed. Her name was Margaret Hayes, though everyone called her Maggie. She was younger when they first locked me up, a clerk at the sheriff's office back then, before she took a job in the prison records department. I remembered her voice from my trial. I didn't see her, but I heard her swearing under oath that all the evidence had been properly collected and carefully preserved. I heard the papers shuffling in her hands, heard the way her breath hitched when the prosecutor mentioned the girl's body. I didn't know it was her outside my cell until the smell gave her away. The same faint lavender I'd noticed in the hallway that night. The same hesitation in her steps. Days after that torn newspaper appeared under my bowl, she came again. This time she spoke louder, stronger, like someone who'd spent years choking on silence and finally decided to breathe. "Reverend," she said, standing just beyond the bars, "do you remember my voice?" "I remember everyone's voice," I answered, "but yours sounds different now." She let out a sad little laugh. "That's what guilt does. It changes the way a person talks to themselves." She stepped closer. I could feel her presence, her hand gripping the bars, knuckles pressing against the metal. "I was there the night they brought you in," she said. "I typed the reports. I filed the evidence. I saw the girl's dress, the dirt on her shoes, the scratches on her arms. I listened when the sheriff talked to that man, the one whose name you tried to say in court." My chest tightened. So he was there. "Yes," she whispered. "He was. She trusted him. Everyone in town did. His family gave money to the church, to the school, to the sheriff's campaign. The girl's parents didn't want to believe she would ever meet him in secret, much less go into the woods with him. But she did. She fell quiet then, like the words had scraped her throat raw on the way out. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "Because I was a coward," she said. No hesitation, no excuse. "Because I was young and afraid and I thought the sheriff knew best. He told me the girl's family couldn't handle the scandal. He told me the town needed to heal. He told me putting you away would make people feel safe again." She took a breath that sounded like a sob she refused to let escape. And I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to. I stood there in the dark, my fingers resting lightly on the bars, listening to the sound of a woman watching her own soul fall apart. "All these years," she continued, "I've been sitting on boxes of old files. I've seen the things they hid, the witness statements they never showed your lawyer, the footprints that didn't match your shoes, the torn fabric that wasn't from your coat, the second set of cigarette butts from a brand you never smoked." I swallowed hard. "Why now, Maggie?" I asked. "Why tell me all this only after my appeals are done? After my execution date is set?" She let the silence answer for a few seconds before she spoke again. "Because I thought time would make it easier to live with," she said. "But it hasn't. It only made it worse. And when they set your date, when I saw your file moved into the final drawer, I realized something. If I don't speak now, I'll take this lie to my grave. And I'm not willing to stand before God with your blood still on my hands." Her words hit me harder than the verdict ever did. "Can you testify?" I asked, grabbing the bars now. "Can you tell them what you saw? What they hid? Can you write it all down, sign your name, force them to reopen the case?" I heard her head gently knock against the metal as she leaned forward. "It's too late," she said softly. "Legally, they won't move. I tried. I spoke to a lawyer. He said there's not enough to overturn a sentence after all these years. The sheriff is dead. The man whose name you heard is old now, protected by people who have more money than we can imagine. And the girl," her voice broke. "She can't speak for herself." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I felt anger surge inside me, hot, raw, burning. But it wasn't aimed at her. Not entirely. It was aimed at the system that had built a coffin out of procedure and paperwork, nailed it shut, and stamped the word justice on the lid. "So that's it?" I asked quietly. "I just die, and the truth dies with me?" "No," she said, and for the first time there was steel in her voice. "That's why I'm here. There's something else, something I didn't tell you." A faint electrical hum buzzed in the distance, the prison's veins waking up for the night. I felt my heart beating faster. "What is it?" I asked. She slipped something through the gap between the bars. My fingers fumbled until I found it, a small, cold object, rectangular with ridges. A recorder. "I found the old statement you gave the first night," she said. "The one they never filed. The one where you described his voice, where you repeated the name the girl tried to say. They buried it. But if you say it again, if you leave it recorded, in your own words, with everything I know added to the record." She paused, then finished. "Then even if they kill you, the truth will still be alive." I ran my thumb along the device, feeling the buttons, the smooth face of it. "You want me to make a tape?" I murmured. "You want me to tell everything?" "Yes," she said. "All of it. Not just for you, for her, for your son, for anyone who might one day pick up this tape and finally ask, how many more like him were there?" My throat tightened. "And what about you?" I asked. "If they find out you helped me." She exhaled through her nose, a tired, bitter sound. "I've been living in a prison of my own making for years," she said. "Bars you can't see, doors that never really open. If telling the truth finally locks me somewhere real, then maybe that's the closest thing to freedom I'll ever get." The keys on a guard's belt jingled at the far end of the corridor. She stepped back, her voice dropping to a whisper again. "Tomorrow," she said. "After lights out. Record it, all of it. Don't hold anything back." Her footsteps faded, leaving me alone with the recorder in my hand and a storm inside my chest. For the first time, I didn't just feel like a man waiting to die. I felt like a witness. I lay awake that night, turning the recorder over and over, hearing every voice from my past echoing in the darkness. The girl's broken whisper, my son's uncertain letter, the sheriff's cold authority, the judge's final sentence, and Maggie's trembling courage. They could take my life, they could steal my years. But if that tape survived, then one day, someone would have to look at what they did. And as the hours crept toward dawn, one thought settled in my mind like a final, unshakable truth. If these are to be my last words, then I will make sure they are the heaviest words I have ever spoken. Because once that tape starts rolling, there will be no turning back. I want you to understand something before I go on. Something most people out there can't imagine. There's a sound that fills these walls the day before a man dies. It's not the generator humming or the guards whispering or the keys rattling through the hall. It's something quieter, something colder. It's the sound of a man accepting that the world has stopped waiting for him. And that sound has been sitting inside me ever since they slid tomorrow's date under my door. But I'm not telling you this because I'm afraid. Not anymore. Fear left me long ago. Maybe the day they took my sight. Maybe the day they took the truth out of my hands. What I feel now is something different. A weight. Yes. But also a strange kind of clarity. Maybe that's what happens when a man knows the sun will rise one last time for him. Since this camera turned on. Since I started speaking in this tiny square of darkness. I've felt something shifting inside me. Something waking up. Like all the years of silence have been gathering behind my ribs, waiting for this exact moment to break free. I didn't sleep last night. Couldn't. I sat right here, on this same edge of this same cold bed, thinking about the recorder Maggie gave me. Thinking about the words I'm putting into this camera right now. Thinking about the truth pressing against my throat, begging to be spoken before they strapped me to that chair. I ran my fingers over the microphone, imagining my voice traveling beyond these walls, past the razor wire, past the lies, past the grave they dug for me long before my body ever lies in it. I imagined someone finding this tape years from now, maybe a stranger, maybe my son, and hearing the sound of a man who was never allowed to finish his story. If James ever hears my voice again, I hope he recognizes it. I hope he forgives me for leaving him with questions no child should carry. And I hope he finally knows that I never abandoned him. Life just pulled us apart faster than either of us could hold on. But tonight, as this camera keeps rolling, I feel closer to him than I have in decades. I remember the last time I held his hand. Small, warm, trusting. I remember the way he used to say, "Father, you're going the wrong way," then laugh when I pretended to trip. I remember the way he clung to my arm at his mother's funeral, just the two of us standing under a gray sky that felt too big for our grief. And I remember his voice in that letter, heavy with doubt. If he were standing here now, if he could hear the truth as I'm speaking it, maybe that doubt would soften. Maybe he would understand that I went into those woods to save a life, not take one. Maybe he would hear the fear in the girl's final breaths. Maybe he would hear the truth in mine. The guards told me to prepare myself, prepare my soul, prepare my body, prepare my mind. But how does a man prepare to die for a lie? How does he steady his hands when he knows they will soon be tied down? How does he calm his breath when he knows it will soon be stolen? How does he face the chair when the last thing he ever saw clearly was a world that refused to look back? I'm not ready. No man ever is. But I am willing. Willing to speak. Willing to reveal the truth the sheriff buried. Willing to repeat the name the girl whispered as the darkness closed around her. Willing to expose the real footsteps I heard behind me in those woods. Willing to leave behind a voice that won't die even when I do. Because when this night ends, when the lights go out, when this camera records its final frame, there will be something waiting on the other side of the darkness. A truth sharp enough to cut through decades of lies. And in the next topic, I will tell you exactly what happened in those woods, not the story they told, not the story the town believed, but the truth. The whole truth. The truth that cost me my life. I've been trying to keep track of time, but in a place like this, hours don't behave the way they should. They stretch, they shrink, they twist into something unrecognizable. The guards walked past my cell a little while ago, their boots dragging slightly, their keys clicking against each other like restless bones. That's how I know the night is getting deeper. That's how I know tomorrow is closer than ever. I can't see the clock they keep at the end of the hall, but I hear it sometimes. The faint tick when everything else is quiet. A heartbeat outside of my own. A reminder that time keeps moving, even when a man's life is standing still. Since this camera started recording, I haven't stopped talking, and I won't. Not until there's nothing left to tell. You deserve to hear the truth from me, not from the newspapers, not from the court, not from the sheriff who kept secrets locked behind his badge. You deserve to hear it from the only person who lived those moments and survived long enough to speak them out loud. Tonight I've been thinking about the cold, not the kind you feel on your skin, but the kind that settles in a man's bones when he knows his life is being measured in minutes instead of years. It's a cold that reaches places no blanket or prayer can warm, and yet, sitting here, speaking to this camera, I feel something else beneath that cold. Something like purpose. Maybe that's strange, feeling purpose on the night before your death. But purpose is all I have left. I keep remembering the girl's voice, how fragile it was, how small, how she tried to say something, a name, but the words broke apart before leaving her trembling lips. I've replayed that moment in my mind so many times that it feels like a second heartbeat inside my chest. And tonight, as the minutes slip through my fingers, I realize something. Her voice didn't die in those woods. Not yet. Not as long as I can speak it back into the world. The guards brought my final meal earlier. They always do it hours before dawn, as if food matters to a man who won't live long enough to digest it. They slid the tray in, and one of them muttered, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. His voice told me what his words couldn't, that even he wasn't sure anymore. That doubt had started to seep through the cracks of their certainty. Doubt is dangerous in a place built on order. Doubt means someone might start asking questions. Doubt means someone might start looking for the truth. I've spent years in this room, feeling the walls like a blind man feels the edges of a forgotten world. My fingers know every crack, every scratch, every piece of peeling paint. And yet tonight, everything feels different. The air feels heavier. The silence feels sharper. Even the floor beneath my feet feels colder, as if the world is preparing for what they plan to do with me tomorrow. But you know what surprises me the most? I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of dying unheard. That's why this tape matters. That's why your ears matter. That's why I've kept talking from the moment that light above the lens flickered on. Because there's something you need to understand before I tell you the truth. Before I go back to those woods and walk you through every sound, every breath, every footstep I heard. I didn't go there to save myself. I went there to save her, and I tried. Dear God, I tried. The forest was cold that night. I remember the wet leaves under my shoes, the trembling air, the way the wind carried the girl's voice to me like a fragile thread pulling me forward. I remember stumbling over roots I couldn't see, reaching out blindly in the dark, praying I wouldn't be too late. And I remember something else, something that kept me awake all these years. Footsteps, not mine, not hers. Someone else was there, someone who shouldn't have been. And in the next topic, when I finally tell you what I heard in those woods, you'll understand why they needed me silent. Because the truth doesn't just expose one lie. It tears apart every lie built on top of it. And once I speak it, There will be no turning back. I don't know how many hours I have left. They don't tell a man like me the exact minute. Maybe they think it's kinder that way. Maybe it's just easier for them. But I can feel it. There's a rhythm to this place on the last night. The guards walk a little slower. Their keys don't jingle as much. Voices drop as if they're afraid to disturb something sacred or cursed. Even the other men down this hall have gone quiet. No more shouting, no more banging on the doors, just a strange, heavy silence, like everyone is holding their breath at the same time. I've faced a lot of nights in this cell, nights when the cold crawled up my spine, nights when memories hurt more than the shackles, nights when I begged God to let the truth matter again. But tonight isn't like the others. Tonight isn't about me anymore. Tonight is about her, about that girl in the woods, about the name she tried to say, and the man who's been allowed to live his life while mine was slowly drained away. I want you to see that night as clearly as a blind man can remember it. I'd finished preaching in a small clearing near the road. My legs were tired. My eyes were already little more than shadows and light. I was packing my Bible, ready to find a place to sleep, when I heard it. A cry. Short, sharp, cut off too quickly. It wasn't the sound of a woman yelling at her children, or boys fighting in the distance. No, this was different. It was the sound of fear trying to escape a throat that someone was trying to silence. I froze. Then I heard it again, softer this time, choked. A single word, or maybe a name. I couldn't make it out clearly, but the desperation in it was enough to move my feet before my mind even caught up. I picked up my walking stick and followed the sound. The ground turned uneven under my shoes. Roots, stones, wet leaves, branches brushed against my arms and face. The smell of damp earth grew stronger. I stumbled more than once, catching myself on trees I couldn't see. But her voice kept pulling me forward like a rope tied around my chest. Please. That one I heard clearly. When I finally reached her, I didn't know exactly where I was. Somewhere deep enough in the woods that the road was gone and the town noises were nothing but fading echoes. I only knew one thing for sure. She was on the ground. I knelt beside her, my hand searching blindly until it found her shoulder. She flinched at my touch, then gripped my sleeve with fingers that shook like leaves in a storm. Her breath was ragged, broken. I could feel the fabric of her dress torn under my fingertips, dirt and blood staining the cloth. "I'm here," I whispered. "You're not alone. Hold on." Her lips moved near my ear. She tried to speak, tried to say a name. Harp. Harp. The rest dissolved into a cough and a sob. I bent closer. "Who? Tell me. Tell me who did this to you." Her fingers tightened around my sleeve, then loosened. Her hand slipped away. The weight of her arm fell against the earth. I pressed my ear to her chest. Her heart was still beating, faint, uneven, fighting. "Stay with me," I begged. "Please, stay with me." That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine, not hers. Slow at first, then stopping. I could feel someone watching. You may not think a blind man can feel eyes on him, but he can. The air changes. It thickens. Your skin knows before your mind does. "Who's there?" I called out. "Help me. She needs a doctor." Silence. Then the faintest crunch of a shoe turning away. "Don't you walk away!" I shouted. "Come back! Help her!" I heard the footsteps retreat, faster now, moving through the brush, climbing the slight rise behind me. My ears followed the sound, cataloging every detail, the weight, the distance, the length of his stride. This was no boy. This was a grown man, And then, just before he got too far to hear, I caught one more sound. A voice. His voice, low, angry, cursing under his breath. I knew that voice. I'd heard it before, in town near the church, handing out coins as if generosity could wash away arrogance. A man people like to thank in public and whisper about in private. I called out his name that night. I called it in the dark, with my hands covered in the dirt beside that girl. But no one listened. By the time the sheriff arrived, she was still. Her heart had gone quiet. They ripped me away from her, shouting that I'd been caught over the body. They never checked which direction the footprints led. They never measured the size. They never asked why my cane was lying several feet away, as if I'd tossed it aside to reach her faster. They only saw one thing, a blind old preacher with a dead girl in his arms. And that was all they needed. When I tried to tell them about the footsteps, about the man's voice, about the name she tried to say, they laughed. They said a blind man couldn't identify anyone in the dark. They said my ears were confused. They erased that part from the written statement. Maggie told me so years later, when her conscience finally grew louder than her fear. They took my words and cut them open until only a lie remained. Now, on this last night, as I sit here in front of this camera with the weight of the world pressing on my ribs, I want you to understand. I may not have seen his face, but I knew who was there. The girl knew too. She tried to say his name with her final breath. And in the next topic, with whatever time I have left, I will say that name out loud, clearly, slowly, without fear. I will tell you who walked away while she died. I will tell you what he did afterward. And I will tell you why they chose me instead of him. Because if these are to be my last words, then they will carry the truth that took my life. And once you hear it, you'll never be able to unknow it. There's something strange about the moment a man realizes he has nothing left to lose, nothing left to protect, nothing left to hide, only the truth. My hands are trembling, not from fear, that left me long ago, not from age. My bones have been old for years. They tremble because the words I'm about to speak carry more weight than anything I've ever preached. Words they tried to bury. Words that cost a young girl her life. And mine. You've walked with me through the darkness. You've heard about the woods, the footsteps, the voice. Now you deserve the name. The girl, before her breath faded, tried to say it. She tried to warn me. She tried to tell the world. Har. That's all she could manage before her voice broke. But I heard the rest in the footsteps behind me, in the anger dripping from his breath, in the curse he spat as he ran away. And I'm going to say it now. His name was Harold Tate, a man beloved by the town, a man with a smile polished like silver and a hand always stretched out in generosity. A man whose family owned half the businesses in that county. A man who could walk into the sheriff's office and not even knock. The girl trusted him. Everyone did. And that trust killed her. I heard his boots climb the ridge behind us. Heavy, steady, unhurried. Not the steps of a man fleeing a monster. The steps of a man walking away from an inconvenience. A mistake. Something he needed gone before someone noticed. When he realized she wasn't dead yet, he didn't come back. He didn't kneel beside her. He didn't cry for help like a decent man would. He left her. Left her in the dirt. Left her in the dark. And when the sheriff found out, he didn't arrest him. Didn't question him. Didn't even write his name in the file. He closed the door, lowered his voice, and said, "We don't drag the Tate family through the mud, so they dragged me instead. A blind preacher, poor, alone, easy to reshape into a monster. They twisted my words, erased my testimony, destroyed the original recording of my statement. They let that girl's last breath disappear into the soil because the truth was too heavy for their fragile community to carry. And for decades, I carried it alone. But not anymore. Because tonight, with this camera recording every word, I want the world to know something. I heard Harold Tate that night. I heard him whisper her name. I heard him curse when he realized she wasn't dead. And I heard him run. The sheriff protected him because Harold's father funded his campaign, because the town owed them favors, because appearance mattered more than justice, and because a blind preacher was the perfect offering to keep the Tate family clean. But I'm not their offering anymore. Not tonight. The truth lives here. In my voice, in this tape, in these final minutes they cannot take from me. I didn't kill that girl. I tried to save her, and she died holding onto my sleeve, trying to say the name of the man who walked away. Harold Tate. Let the world remember that name. I forgive him. It took me years. But I do. Not because he deserves it, but because forgiveness is the only thing I have left to give. And to my son, if you ever hear this, know that your father did not die a liar. I walked into those woods because God put me there, not to bury the truth, but to witness it. You asked in your letter what you should believe. Believe this, these words, this truth, this voice, because these are all I have left. And now, these were my last words.
When the tape stopped recording, the room was silent. Reverend Marcus Lee remained seated exactly where he had been for hours, hands resting on his knees, head slightly lifted toward the camera, as if he were finally able to look the world in the eyes, even without sight. For the first time in decades, the truth no longer lived only inside him. He had spoken it. He had freed it. He exhaled softly, a breath that carried a lifetime of weight. Hours later, before dawn touched the edge of the Tennessee sky, the guards walked down the corridor. Their footsteps were slow, hesitant. Even they felt the heaviness of what had been recorded. Some avoided looking at him. Others lingered, knowing they were escorting an innocent man to the place where the state had decided his story would end. But stories don't end where lives do. The execution report stated the time, the procedure, the witnesses. It did not mention the tape. The warden ordered it destroyed. One guard refused. He hid it for more than 30 years, tucked away in a locked box, buried under dust and guilt. Only after his retirement, and only after his conscience finally broke under the weight of silence, did the tape come to light. And when its contents were played, the truth Marcus carried alone was finally heard. Harold Tate died a wealthy man, never questioned, never charged, never exposed, until the tape surfaced. Newspapers reopened the case. Families demanded answers. The sheriff's old files were examined again. And the name the girl tried to speak spread farther than anyone in that town ever imagined. Marcus Lee did not live to see justice, but justice lived because of him. This story is not about death. It is about the truth refusing to stay buried. It is about a blind preacher who saw more in the darkness than the town ever saw in the light. And now that you know his truth, tell us in the comments, from which city and state are you watching this? Let his voice reach every corner of the world. Let justice travel farther than his life ever could. And remember, listen with your heart, because some truths can only be heard that way.